Sarah Chen stared at her tablet screen, her heart sinking as she looked at her test scores for the fifth time that morning. The bright red 32% glowed mockingly at her from the quantum xenobiology exam results. She sat alone in the massive chrome and glass hallway of Galactic University's science building, trying to gather enough courage to enter Professor Kethrix's office. The door in front of her wasn't just any door. It was 3 meters tall to accommodate the professor's mantis-like height. Like all Arcsians, Dr. Kethrix needed special rooms and furniture. Sarah had spent an entire semester looking up at him during lectures, watching his 4 arms move gracefully as he explained complex biological systems of different alien species. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pressed the entry request button. A soft blue light pulsed, and the door slid open with a gentle hiss. "Enter, Student Chen," came the clicking voice of Dr. Kethrix. Sarah walked in, feeling smaller than usual. The office was huge, with ceiling-high windows showing the purple sky of New Mars Colony. Dr. Kethrix sat behind a massive desk, his compound eyes reflecting the light from his multiple computer screens. "I assume this is about your recent exam performance," he said, his mandibles moving slowly as he spoke through his translator. "Yes, Professor," Sarah managed to say. I can't fail this class. My scholarship depends on it." Dr. Kethrix's antennae twitched. A gesture Sarah had learned meant he was thinking deeply. He rose from his chair, his full 3-meter height making Sarah take a step back. In the light, his exoskeleton shimmered with patterns of deep green and blue. "Student Chen, your understanding of theoretical concepts is acceptable," he clicked, walking to the window. "But your practical application scores are concerning. You humans have a saying, actions speak louder than words." Sarah felt her hopes starting to fade. She'd worked so hard to get into Galactic University. Being one of only 50 humans admitted that year had made her family proud. Now it was all about to end because she couldn't properly explain how a Zentorian's third liver worked. Then Dr. Kethrix did something unexpected. He made a sound that Sarah's translator identified as laughter. However, he continued, turning back to face her, "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Sarah's heart jumped. "Anything, Professor. I require assistance with a personal project. The Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Festival is approaching in 2 standard weeks. I have been selected to represent Arcsian culture, but I am also required to demonstrate understanding of another species' customs." He paused, his antennae twitching again. "I wish to learn human cooking." Sarah blinked, sure she had heard wrong. "Cooking? You want to learn how to cook human food?" "Precisely. Spend 48 hours teaching me your species' culinary arts. If you succeed in helping me prepare acceptable human dishes, I will allow you to retake the exam." Sarah's mind raced. She wasn't a great cook, but she had grown up helping in her parents' restaurant. Basic human cooking she could definitely teach. "Deal," she said quickly, before he could change his mind. Dr. Kethrix's mandibles spread in what she recognized as an Arcsian smile. "Excellent. We begin tomorrow at 800 hours in Laboratory Kitchen 7. He turned back to his desk, then added, "And Student Chen, bring protective equipment. I have been told my first attempts at human cooking might be explosive." Sarah left the office feeling dazed. She had expected detention, extra assignments, or even expulsion. Instead, she was going to teach an alien professor how to cook Chinese food. As she walked down the hallway, she couldn't help but wonder if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Laboratory Kitchen 7 wasn't like any kitchen Sarah had seen before. The room was spotless, with metal surfaces gleaming under bright white lights. Every pot, pan, and utensil was neatly labeled and arranged by size. It looked more like a science lab than a place to cook food. Dr. Kethrix stood at the center, wearing what looked like a massive chef's apron specially designed for his 4 arms. His antennae twitched nervously as he examined a standard earth-issue frying pan, as if it were a strange specimen. "Student Chen," he clicked through his translator, I have studied human nutritional documents. They claim humans require calcium. Therefore, I have acquired these. He proudly pointed to a pile of small rocks on the counter. Sarah blinked. Professor, we don't actually eat rocks. We get calcium from things like milk and cheese. The professor's compound eyes reflected confusion. But rocks are the most efficient source of minerals. On Arxis, we consume processed meteorites for optimal nutrition. Well, humans are a bit different, Sarah explained, trying not to laugh. She reached into her bag and pulled out some basic ingredients she brought. Let's start with something simple: fried rice. It's a good beginner dish. Dr. Kithrix watched intently as Sarah demonstrated how to measure rice. His 4 hands moved carefully, trying to copy her movements, but his large claws kept spilling grains everywhere. Most fascinating, he muttered, using a microscanner to analyze a single grain of rice. And humans consume this without processing it into liquid form first. Yes, Professor. Now, we need to wash the rice. No, wait. Dr. Kithrix had turned the water on at full blast, sending rice spraying across the kitchen. His attempt to catch it with all 4 hands only made things worse, knocking over a stack of bowls that clattered to the floor. I appear to have miscalculated the water pressure required for this operation, he said, sounding embarrassed. Rice grains stuck to his exoskeleton, making him look like he'd been caught in a tiny white snowstorm. As they cleaned up the mess, Sarah noticed something interesting. Despite his clumsy attempts, Dr. Kithrix was taking detailed notes on his tablet, recording every mistake and observation. He approached cooking exactly like a science experiment. Professor, Sarah asked while showing him how to properly rinse rice, why did you choose to learn human cooking? There must be easier cultural activities. Dr. Kithrix's antennae drooped slightly. On Arxis, food preparation is considered one of the highest arts. Yet many of my colleagues believe humans are too primitive to understand true culinary science. I wish to prove them wrong. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with determination. Well, then we'll definitely prove them wrong. But first, we need to talk about spices. They're not just for decoration. They're not. Dr. Kithrix picked up a bottle of soy sauce, examining it closely. I assumed these were ceremonial paint additions. Actually, they're for flavor. Here, let me show. Sarah stopped mid-sentence as Dr. Kithrix, misunderstanding, began to paint elegant Arxian symbols on the kitchen counter with the soy sauce. Professor, we're supposed to put that in the food. Ah. He looked at his artwork, then back at Sarah. Human cuisine is more complex than I anticipated. Perhaps we should start with the basic principles of flavor chemistry. Sarah nodded, hiding a smile. This was going to be a long 2 days, but at least it wouldn't be boring. As she began explaining the difference between seasonings and actual paint, she couldn't help but notice that despite his mistakes, Dr. Kithrix's eyes showed genuine fascination with every new detail she shared. After 6 hours of cooking lessons, Sarah and Dr. Kithrix were taking a short break. The kitchen looked like a battlefield. Flour dusted every surface, several pots bore scorch marks, and there was a suspicious dent in the ceiling from when the professor had gotten too excited about human food flipping techniques. Sarah sat on a tall stool, sipping water and watching Dr. Kithrix carefully examine the slightly burnt fried rice he'd managed to make. He was using some kind of alien scanner on it, his antennae moving back and forth with interest. Student Chen, he said suddenly, still studying the rice, are you aware of the current political situation between humans and Arxians? Sarah straightened up. This was the first time he'd mentioned anything about politics. Not really, Professor. I just know we're still new to the galactic community. Dr. Kithrix put down his scanner and turned all 4 hands palm up, an Arxian gesture of openness. The Arxian High Council is currently debating whether to grant humans full diplomatic status. Many believe your species is too unpredictable. Unpredictable. Sarah frowned. Is that why you're really learning to cook? It's not just for the cultural exchange. Correct. His compound eyes reflected the kitchen lights as he moved closer. You see, cooking is sacred to my people. We believe that a species' approach to food preparation reveals their true nature. Some council members claim humans are too chaotic, too emotional to be trusted with full diplomatic privileges. Sarah thought about this while looking at the mess around them. Well, this kitchen probably isn't helping our case. Dr. Kithrix made his clicking laugh sound. On the contrary, in just 6 hours, you have shown remarkable patience teaching an alien twice your size how to handle delicate human cooking tools. You adapted your teaching methods when I struggled. You found solutions to problems my biology created. He picked up a pair of specially modified tongs they created for his claws. This is exactly what the council needs to see. So this is like a test case to show humans can work well with Arxens. Indeed, if I can successfully learn human cooking, something many consider impossible due to our physical differences, it proves our species can cooperate effectively. He paused, antennae drooping slightly. However, some of my colleagues are less supportive of this idea. Just then, the kitchen door slid open. A tall, ancient-looking Arxian entered, his exoskeleton a pale, weathered gray. Sarah recognized him as Dean Varrock, head of the science department. Thrix, the dean's translator, crackled with disapproval. What is the meaning of this chaos? I receive reports of possible safety violations. Dr. Kithrix straightened to his full height. Dean Varrock, this is an approved cultural research project. The dean's antennae fixed forward aggressively. Research. This looks like a waste of university resources, and involving a struggling student. His compound eyes turned to Sarah. I've reviewed your academic records, Ms. Chen. They are unimpressive. Sarah felt her face grow hot with embarrassment, but before she could respond, Dr. Kithrix stepped between them. Student Chen's understanding of human culinary arts is extensive. Her teaching methods are both efficient and insightful. Cooking is not science, Dean Varrock clicked dismissively. This project is inappropriate for an institution of higher learning. I expect this laboratory to be cleared by tomorrow. He turned and stalked out, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Sarah looked up at her professor. I'm sorry, Dr. Kithrix. I don't want to cause trouble for you. Do not apologize. His voice was firm. The dean's views are outdated. Now, he picked up a wok with his upper hands while holding ingredients with his lower ones. Shall we continue proving him wrong? The next morning, Sarah arrived at Laboratory Kitchen 7 to find Dr. Kithrix already hard at work. He had insisted on practicing through the night, and now dozens of pancakes in various states of disaster lay scattered around the kitchen. Some were burnt black, others were barely cooked, and a few looked more like abstract art than food. Professor, Sarah called out, concerned. Have you been here all night? Ah, Student Chen. Dr. Kithrix turned from the stove, his exoskeleton dusted with flour. I have been attempting to master what you humans call the perfect flip. My success rate is currently 2.3%. Sarah noticed he taped his notes about pancake making all over the walls. Each page was filled with detailed diagrams and calculations about flipping angles and optimal cooking temperatures. The problem, he continued, picking up a pan with his upper arms while gesturing with his lower ones, appears to be the timing. Watch carefully. What happened next seemed to move in slow motion. Dr. Kithrix flicked the pan upward with too much force. The half-cooked pancake shot into the air like a rocket, hit the ceiling with a wet splat, and landed directly on one of the burners. The pancake burst into flames instantly. Fire suppression systems activating, announced the kitchen's eye. No, wait. Sarah started to say, but it was too late. White foam sprayed from the ceiling, covering everything and everyone. In the kitchen, through the chaos, they heard the kitchen door slide open. Dean Varrock stood there, his gray exoskeleton practically vibrating with anger. This, he clicked furiously, is exactly what I warned about. Kithrix, You are endangering university property and students with these foolish experiments. Sarah looked at Dr. Kithrix, expecting him to back down. Instead, her professor drew himself up to his full height, foam dripping from his antennae. Dean Virach, he said firmly, in science, we learn through trial and error. Isn't that what we teach our students? This is not science. The dean's translator crackled with emotion. This is a waste of resources on a primitive species' cooking rituals. Something snapped inside Sarah. Maybe it was the stress of the past few days, or maybe it was seeing her professor covered in fire suppression foam while still trying to learn. Either way, she'd had enough. Primitive. She stepped forward, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. Do you know how much math goes into baking? How much chemistry is involved in making flavors work together? Dr. Kithrix understands that. He's been calculating ratios and reactions all night. The dean's compound eyes fixed on her. You dare? Yes, I dare. Sarah grabbed one of Dr. Kithrix's calculation sheets from the wall. Look at this. He's turned pancake flipping into an advanced physics equation. That's not primitive. That's taking something simple and finding the science in it. Isn't that exactly what good scientists do? The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet drip of foam. Dean Virach's antennae twitched rapidly as he looked from Sarah to the calculations to the determined stance of Dr. Kithrix. Finally, the dean spoke. You have until the end of today to prove this experiment has value. After that, I'm shutting it down. He turned sharply and left, his steps echoing down the hallway. Dr. Kithrix looked at Sarah with what she learned to recognize as an Orcsian expression of respect. That was unexpected. Sarah managed a shaky smile. Well, you've been learning human cooking. Maybe I've been learning a bit of Orcsian courage. She looked around at the foam-covered kitchen. Now, should we clean up and try those pancakes again? Indeed. Dr. Kithrix picked up his notes, adding a new observation. Human determination. Most impressive. As Sarah cleaned the last of the foam from the kitchen counter, a sudden thought struck her. She'd been trying to teach Dr. Kithrix cooking the way her parents had taught her, through tradition and practice. But he was a scientist. Maybe she needed to speak his language. Professor, she said, turning to where he was carefully measuring pancake ingredients for the 20th time. What if we approach this differently? Let's think about cooking like a xenobiology experiment. Dr. Kithrix's antennae perked up with interest. Explain. Sarah grabbed a clean datapad and started writing. Okay, take pancakes. The flour proteins are like cell structures. When we mix them with liquid, they create bonds, just like the cellular bonds we studied in class. The professor's compound eyes seemed to light up. Yes, and the heat application causes protein denaturation, similar to how Zentorian tissue responds to temperature changes. Exactly. Sarah felt excited now. And look at the chemical reaction when we add baking powder. It's just like the gas exchange process in Martian cave dwellers. For the next hour, they'd rebuilt their entire cooking lesson plan using scientific principles. Sarah translated every recipe into formal lab procedures, complete with hypothesis and expected results. Dr. Kithrix absorbed it all, his four hands moving rapidly as he took notes. Student Chen, he clicked enthusiastically. This is brilliant. The heat distribution in pan frying follows the same principles as thermal regulation in desert-dwelling species. They started again with the pancakes, but this time approaching it like a controlled experiment. Dr. Kithrix adjusted the stove's temperature with scientific precision, measuring the heat distribution with his scanner. Now, Sarah explained, the surface tension of the batter follows fluid dynamics. When flipping, we need to calculate the optimal force needed to overcome gravity while maintaining structural integrity. Dr. Kithrix made some quick calculations on his datapad, adjusted his grip on the pan, and flipped. The pancake rose perfectly, rotated once, and landed golden side up. Success! His delighted clicking filled the kitchen. The application of scientific principles to human cooking is remarkable. Word spread quickly through the science building. Other alien students and professors started dropping by, curious about what was happening. Sarah found herself explaining cooking chemistry to a group of fascinated xenobiology students. A young Arxian student watched in amazement as Dr. Kithrix successfully flipped another pancake. "But sir, how do you compensate for the differences in our appendage structure?" "Observe." Dr. Kithrix demonstrated the modified cooking tools they created. "We adapted the tools using biomechanical principles, similar to how we study evolutionary adaptations." Even some of Dean Varrock's junior staff sneaked in to watch. One of them whispered to Sarah, "This is incredible. No one's ever made xenobiology this accessible before." As the day went on, Sarah and Dr. Kithrix moved on to more complex dishes, treating each one as a new experiment. They documented everything: temperature reactions, chemical processes, timing variables. The kitchen walls were soon covered with charts showing the relationship between heat application and protein coagulation in eggs. By evening, Dr. Kithrix had mastered not just pancakes, but several basic human dishes. More importantly, he understood the science behind why each step worked. "Student Chen," he said as they reviewed their day's data, "you have done more than teach me to cook. You have shown how universal scientific principles can bridge our species' differences." Sarah smiled, watching him organize their notes with all four hands. "And you've helped me see that everything connects to xenobiology, even making breakfast." As they cleaned up the kitchen, Sarah realized something. In teaching Dr. Kithrix to understand human cooking through science, she'd finally started to truly understand xenobiology herself. News about the cooking experiment spread through Galactic University like wildfire. On the morning of their final day of lessons, Sarah arrived to find Laboratory Kitchen 7 crowded with visitors. Students and professors from different species filled every corner, watching Dr. Kithrix demonstrate his newly mastered cooking skills. The thermal application process, he explained to the amazed crowd, using all four hands to cook efficiently, follows the same principles as energy transfer in deep space organisms. A floating jellyfish-like student waved its tentacles excitedly. "But professor, how do you account for human taste preferences when you can't eat their food yourself?" "An excellent question." Dr. Kithrix gestured to Sarah with one of his free hands while flipping a perfect omelette with another. "Student Chen helped me understand that taste is simply chemical reactions detected by specialized organs, much like how we study sensory responses in different species." Sarah watched proudly as her professor handled multiple cooking tasks at once, his movements now smooth and confident. The kitchen no longer looked like a disaster zone. Instead, it resembled a well-organized laboratory where science and cooking blended perfectly. Even some of Dean Varrock's strongest supporters had snuck in to watch. Sarah overheard two senior professors whispering behind her. "Remarkable methodology," one clicked softly. "Using xenobiology principles to understand alien cultural practices." "Indeed," the other responded. "Perhaps we've been too quick to dismiss human approaches." Suddenly, the kitchen door slid open, and a hush fell over the crowd. An Arxian wearing elaborate official robes entered, someone Sarah had never seen before. Dr. Kithrix immediately straightened to attention. "Council members tall. We weren't expecting such an honored visit." The council member's antennae moved gracefully as she surveyed the scene. When reports reached the High Council about unusual teaching methods at the university, I decided to investigate personally. Sarah felt her heart race. A member of the Arxian High Council was here. The same council that was debating humanity's diplomatic status. Council member Zital moved through the crowd, examining the charts and diagrams covering the walls. She paused at a detailed comparison between human digestive enzymes and Arxian nutrient processing. "Fascinating," she clicked, her translator making the words sound musical. "You've found connections between our species through something as simple as food preparation." "Simple yet complex," Dr. Kithrix responded, still cooking. Human cuisine contains hidden layers of scientific principle that mirror our own sacred cooking traditions. The council member turned to Sarah. Young human, step forward. Sarah approached nervously. The council member's compound eyes studied her intensely. You taught an Arxian professor to cook human food by using xenobiology principles, Sittle stated. Why? Sarah took a deep breath. Because science is a universal language, council member. Whether we're studying alien life forms or teaching someone to make pancakes, the principles are the same. We observe, we adapt, we learn from our mistakes, and we find ways to work together. Stull's antennae twitched with what Sarah hoped was approval. And what have you learned from this experience? That differences between species don't have to be barriers, Sarah replied honestly. They can be opportunities to find new ways of understanding each other. The council member was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to address the whole room. I came expecting to find a questionable use of university resources, she announced. Instead, I have found one of the most innovative cross-species teaching exchanges I've ever witnessed. She moved toward the door, but paused beside Sarah. The council will be very interested in hearing about this, especially when we discuss humanity's diplomatic status next week. As Sittal left, the kitchen burst into excited chatter. Dr. Cathrix looked at Sarah, his antennae quivering with joy. Student Chen, he clicked softly. I believe we've done much more than just learn to cook. The day of the Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Festival arrived. The university's main hall had been transformed into a spectacular display of alien cultures, with stands representing dozens of different species. But the longest line of visitors stretched in front of the Earth-Arxis combined cuisine stand. Dr. Cathrix stood proudly behind the counter, all four arms working in perfect coordination. He was preparing his special creation, a fusion dish that combined human cooking techniques with traditional Arxian ingredients. Sarah watched from beside him, amazed at how far they'd come from that first disastrous attempt at making fried rice. The molecular structure of Arxian cave moss, Dr. Cathrix explained to the gathered crowd, reacts to heat similarly to human mushrooms. By applying Earth-style stir-frying techniques, his voice was interrupted by excited murmurs as Dean Varrock approached the stand, accompanied by several members of the Arxian High Council, including Stull. Professor Cathrix, Dean Varrock clicked formally, his gray exoskeleton seeming slightly less stern than before. The council has requested a demonstration of your research. Sarah held her breath as Dr. Cathrix began cooking. His movements were confident and precise as he combined earth vegetables with glowing Arxian plants. The alien ingredients sizzled in the wok, releasing aromas that somehow smelled appealing to both humans and Arxians. Notice, he explained while cooking, how the protein chains in earth vegetables bond with Arxian mineral structures, creating an entirely new form of nutrient delivery, one that both our species can digest. The council members' antennae twitched with increasing interest as Dr. Cathrix plated his creation. The dish looked beautiful, a swirling combination of Earth-style stir-fry with bioluminescent Arxian ingredients that made the whole thing glow with soft blue light. Council members Sittal stepped forward to examine the dish with her scanning tools. After a moment, she looked up, her compound eyes reflecting the dish's glow. Remarkable, she announced. The molecular integration is perfect. You've created something entirely new while preserving the essential elements of both cultures. Sarah couldn't help smiling as she remembered their early disasters. That's what happens when you combine human creativity with Arxian precision, she said. Sittal turned to address the crowd. This project has demonstrated something vital about humanity's place in our galactic community. Through cooking, one of our most sacred arts, they have shown an ability to adapt, innovate, and work in harmony with other species. She paused, her antennae moving in a formal pattern. The High Council has voted. Humanity will be granted full diplomatic status, effective immediately. The hall erupted in cheers. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as Dr. Cathrix's antennae quivered with joy. Oh, Sittal added, turning to Sarah with what looked like an Arxian smile. "And Council Member Varrock has something to add." Sarah blinked in surprise as Dean Varrock stepped forward. Was he now a council member? "Student Chen," he clicked, his translator carrying a note of warmth she'd never heard before. "In light of your innovative teaching methods and contribution to interspecies relations, you have not only passed quantum xenobiology." He paused. "You have been offered a position as a cultural liaison at the Arxian Science Academy after graduation." Sarah couldn't speak. She looked at Dr. Kethrix, who was beaming with pride. "It seems," he said softly, "that we both learned far more than we expected from these cooking lessons." As they continued serving their fusion dishes to the excited crowd, Sarah realized something amazing. What had started as a desperate attempt to pass an exam had turned into something that would help bring their species closer together. And it had all started with a simple cooking lesson.